All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the GOAT District podcast. My name is Dan Williamson. I'm at Overhyped Sleeper. Drop the final E from Sleeper. And I'm filling in for JD, who you all know and love as at GOAT District. And we are talking a little bit of best ball tonight. August is here. The preseason is underway, and things are starting to heat up in the NFL. That brings in the main wave of seasonal players. We've seen the draft rooms stocked with some unfamiliar names now, and that really kind of changes things a little bit. Also, the information really goes from a trickle to a fire hose. Now the trick is to know what's vital knowledge and what's the useless fluff being put out by the beat writers or what's coach speak. We got to know what it is. And, you'll see a single highlight reel run or a highlight reel catch, and it can send somebody's ADP to the moon. Or all of a sudden, maybe somebody pulls a hamstring or a groin or something like that, or has a poor preseason in general, and the rug is pulled out from underneath their ADP. So we're going to be talking about all that kind of stuff. We're going to be talking about how that relates to best ball. But before we get into it, remember, make sure you smash that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to the GOAT District Pod. Catch us on YouTube. Subscribe on your favorite podcast channel. But you want to make sure you're subscribed because we have a huge August. We got tons of great guests for you coming this month. We'll talk about that a little bit more coming up. But lots of great guests. You don't want to miss a single one. This could be the difference between several $100,000 in your bank account and nothing at all. So tap that bell so you never miss an episode on YouTube and bring on the goodness of the GOAT District. Here we go.
Go District. Bleed, I ball. Bleed, I ball. Bleed, I ball. Bleed, ball. And I bleed, I ball. Yeah. Bleed, I ball. It's the Go District, y'all. I ball, cause I bleed. Hey, bleeding, I ball. Defeated the odds, didn't see him at all. JD in the pods, I needed it all. I bleeded a lie. You bleeded a lie, not bleeded a lie. And that's what a GOAT do. Facts, let me show you. Happen to know dudes. Drafting, they don't do bad and they don't lose. Make you wanna bleed. It's the GOAT District, boys giving you the business and no gimmicks. The best ball drafts got me feeling like it's Christmas. Then it's Christmas all of a sudden, and these riches came from nothing. And I got this all from loving a district. See, I just drafted, forget it. I laugh at the critics, they mad at the digits. I clap back by listening. See, BALLiN ain't a problem if you kick it with them off. And I refresh the feed till autumn, then I bleed, go.
What is up, Fantasyland? Theo, my man, how are you?
I'm fired up. We're getting to be almost mid-August right now. We're 30 days away from Dallas, Tampa Bay kicking off the NFL season. We will both be in Las Vegas for that game. I'm very excited. Hard Knocks starts tonight. Things are just heating up.
Yeah, absolutely. I am definitely pumped with the preseason starting up and just everything coming to a conclusion here. So, if you've been subscribed to the channel, we're bringing in the best guests, the biggest winners, and tonight is no different. We've got one of our favorite best ball analysts on with us tonight. Let's just bring him in. Tod Burros. How are you, man? This is fantastic to have you on. Tod and I used to podcast a little bit way back in the day. He was kind enough to break me into podcasting with Run to Daylight Pod, and just so excited to be able to return the favor and get Tod back on with us. How you doing, Tod?
Well, I don't appreciate you calling me the biggest guy. I mean, I know I'm overweight and I'm old, but I would rather make that joke than have you do it at the beginning, Dan.
Well, it was done with love, Tod, and it was also done from a place where I'm hot on your tail. So we'll see who wins that race. So tell us a little bit about what you got going on, Tod. Where can people find you? Tell us a little bit about the podcast, recent guests you've had on, anything else that you want to get into.
Well, I've been taking a little of a break this year. I mean, I've done 20-something podcasts. A good bit of them are live drafts. I've had your boy Theo on. I've had my favorite two of the season, though, I've been doing a lot with Billy Musio, who you guys both know really well. Billy's excellent. Him and I have drafted a lot of teams together. Theo and I have put together a 7, right, Theo?
We're up to 7 right now.
Yeah, we might have to get up to 10 before it's over. There's only 28% left in that tournament. But what I was saying, my 2 favorite shows, I did a excellent podcast with Justin Herzig earlier in the season that I think anyone who wants to play best ball, especially on Underdog, should check out. Justin was the one who took down that prize last year, and he had some real interesting thoughts on strategy. I'd love to do a quick refresher on him with the craziness at wide receiver. I've been in some drafts with him, so I've seen how he's adjusted. It's very similar to how I've adjusted. And then just recently, my new man crush, Dwayne Mcfarland, just awesome guy, really just, no ego and great information. I recommend that one pretty highly as well, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dwayne is a fantastic analyst. We've had him on the GOAT District before, and as a matter of fact, in 2 nights, we're going to have him on again. So we're just following in your shoes there, Todd.
I set you guys right up.
I knew that you would probably do that, so that's great.
That was great promotional content right there from Todd. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I always glad to help.
Yeah, definitely. So, and I do want to say that Justin Herzig podcast, well worth your time. And the Dwayne one I have not gotten to yet, but in all honesty, but the Justin Herzig one, well worth your time. And everything I've heard from Dwayne is fantastic. So I can confidently say that's going to be worth your time as well. It was
high level, right?
Right.
One thing Dan, from podcasting with me is I try and come from an angle that a lot of people don't. Ask the questions that I have no interest in. Not that a lot. Well, you guys aren't fluff, but there's a lot of podcasts that just ask the same questions, right? And what made my day was after the Dwayne podcast, he stayed on for 45 minutes to talk to me, right? He told me I got to get off, and then he stayed with me 45 minutes after the pod. So, awesome. I think that, the whole theme of run to daylight, right? A running back finding a gap and exploiting it. What I've always been at is trying to come and getting information that other people don't have, making my own process better, and I've already taken over the show. So sorry.
It's totally good. You're the guest. You are the main feature, Todd. So we want you to kind of take over the show. But let's talk a little bit about myffpc.com. They are the home of a lot of the best balls that we're going to be talking about. The best ball tournament. They have best ball slims. They have 28 round best balls. You can do super flex. You can do $5 best balls. You can do $1,250 best balls. You can do every range of best balls you can probably think of. FFPC has got it. And if you're looking for the big money, the tournaments, of course, there's the best ball challenge, which is $100,000 to the winner. And then the really big money, $500,000 to winner of the Football Guys Players Championship and to the FFPC main event. The Football Guys Players Championship comes in at $350 a pop. The main event, $1,900 for your first, and then $1,500 or $1,600 after that. So, no matter what level you want to get in on, the FFPC has got your game. They've got standalone auction leagues. They've got Dynasty, you name it, they've got it, and they've got the best customer service in the world. What am I missing, guys?
Nothing. The FFPC is awesome. It's a great place to play. If you want competition, some of the best fantasy players in the world are on the FFPC. And like Dan said, you can pretty much find any format which you like. We highly recommend it, and we all play it.
Yeah, I would say probably dollar-wise this year, about 70% of my volume is on the FFPC.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And, it's just such an easy place to play. I mean, once you get in there, I hate to say it's like crack, but it kind of is. You can just always find something new that you haven't tried before, and everything I've tried is a lot of fun.
Yeah, you play a lot more formats than I do. I'm kind of like the Three Little Bears. Once I find that comfortable bed, I tend to lie down in it. And this year for me, it's the best ball tournament. It's really the thing I've been most excited about playing in about 3 years. I love the format. I love the setup. And I know we're going to talk more about that as we go along.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's stick a pin in that, because I do think we ought to talk just real briefly about the format and how that differs from some of the other sites. But first thing we want to do is we want to talk a little bit about some of the more recent NFL news. Some of it's a little bit old, but some of it's fairly new. And like I was talking about in the intro, I think, this is a time of year where player ADP can really swing pretty wildly based on, a highlight reel, run or catch, a pulled groin or whatever the case may be. We've seen that today. Everybody's talking about Rashad Bateman. So how do you guys handle in general the news when it comes in like that? What's we'll start with you,
well, now that podcasts are on video, I can't pull the groin during oh no.
So what do you do? As far as like when news like that comes through, like Rashad Bateman, let's just take him for an example. What has that done with your thought process on him? Are you waiting for more info? Did you already knock him down, 3 rounds, 5 rounds, 10 rounds, put him on your do not draft list? What's the strategy on that?
Well, obviously it changes based on the type of injury, the severity, when the guy's going. The first thing I do is I take a deep breath, right? I did an article a few years ago comparing Wile E. Coyote and how his chase for the Roadrunner always ended up getting him off a cliff. And that's our biggest advantage this time of year, is to take the news, bring a rational approach, and come up with something that makes sense and not overreact. I mean, if a guy's, first he was a 13th, 14th round pick, and then all of a sudden he was an 11th round pick, and now it wouldn't shock me if he goes back to the 17th round. Well, I'll take him in every draft in the 17th round because especially in a tournament, young guy, a groin, it's not like a hamstring. Hamstrings are, so it really depends on the type of injury, how old the player is, what their history is, and how much people are or do or end up not overreacting to the news. I'm looking for people to overreact.
Awesome. What about you, Theo?
I'll agree with Todd. I think a lot of times you can find value taking a guy where the perception is every injury is just complete gloom and doom. You have to remind yourself we're 30 days out from any NFL football. The goal is not for every player to get every rep in the preseason. The goal is to be ready for week 1. So a guy like Bateman, like Todd said, we liked him enough that he was a riser on many draft boards. Now, if the opportunity presents itself where you can get him a few rounds later, that may pay off at an even higher rate. So I don't freak out too much with injuries. And I certainly like seeing, positive injury news. Like today we saw with Amari Cooper. News like that, I weigh a little heavier, because when a guy gets taken off of PUP and a guy, is back at practice, maybe a little bit ahead of schedule, I always take that as a good sign. So I think it cuts both ways. With Twitter, people kind of freak out every which way, but you can find value in analyzing it the correct way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, non-injury news aside, one of the things that I look for, and I know this is a phrase that Todd uses a lot, is kind of the steady drumbeat of news. When you see a steady drumbeat going positively or a steady drumbeat going negatively, that's what you want to pay attention to. Usually there's some signal there that's telling you something. And, so sometimes that can can help turn you on to a player. Like a few years ago when Alvin Kamara was a rookie, they didn't even play him in the last preseason game. And everybody kind of was, that we had Adrian Peterson there. We had Mark Ingram there. Nobody knew what his role was. People started coming off him. They're like, they're just going to, they're going to basically redshirt him this year and maybe, start him next year. But man, if you got him in the middle rounds, he was a league winner for you. So you got to pay attention to that.
That was my favorite overreaction. And it was because he didn't play in it was the old thinking of the third preseason game. Yep. What they did, and they were clear, was that they were going to give him a lot of run in the second preseason game and give the other two guys a lot of run in the third preseason game. But all the Twitter know-it-alls were like, well, the third preseason game is what matters. Well, what if, and that's one of my favorite things is you get a lot of guys this year talking about, well, you're supposed to draft quarterbacks in the 8th round. Well, that's great. Right. And you've got numbers to back it up. You've got this great optimizer that shows you that. But quarterbacks are going 2 to 3 rounds earlier than they used to. You're using information that has no bearing on what is going on in actual drafts right now. That information is basically useless the way they were using it. So I love that kind of stuff, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's turn to a couple of different situations going around the league. We talked a little bit about this last week, but I'm interested in getting your thoughts on this, Todd. With Carson Wentz being out for who knows how long, at least a couple games, it sounds like, and maybe as many as 6 or 7 or 8. What are you doing with the Colts? Does anybody benefit from Wentz being out? Is anybody hurt by it less than other players, or what do you think in general?
Well, again, it's a 5 to 12 week timeline. As Theo pointed out, we're 5 weeks away from the season. All right. So, and he was hurt, and the surgery was last week. So there is a slight chance he misses no time. All right. He's not. So to make it, he has now gotten to the point where you can draft him in the 18th round. All right. So I have, if I get an early quarterback, Mahomes, Prescott, Lamar Jackson, Kyler, someone who I'm planning on giving me a tremendous score every week, I am perfectly content for Carson Wentz being my number 2 quarterback with one of those studs. And I think you can stack him late with some of these weapons. And I'm also buying Jonathan Taylor on the dip. I think the Quentin Nelson news really affected the way people viewed that offense, but they have a good offensive line anyway. Without Wentz, they're going to need to lean on the running backs more. I am definitely taking the value on Jonathan Taylor dropping right now.
All right, Theo?
I'll agree with Todd as well. I think that it's come to a point where Colts are starting values. Taylor is dropped, in some of these drafts, he's dropped into the back half of the second round, which seems a little crazy for a player that had that kind of finish to a rookie season with that sort of draft capital and that sort of talent. You're going to see some teams with, a top-end running back combined with Jonathan Taylor, and it could be a potentially scary build. And I'll also take it a little step further. I think that Michael Pittman might start becoming a value, a guy that, at the beginning of the draft
already
season,
is. Yeah.
It's crazy. The guy was, really flashed last year. He flashed in the playoffs. He has the draft capital. He was a very high second-round draft pick. And he is the most alpha-looking wide receiver on that entire roster. And tight end wise, they've taken a little bit of a step back with, most likely it's a kind of a split tight end room. So Pittman, to me, is a guy who could get, 115 targets, and now you're going to be able to get him, in the double-digit rounds. So I think you kind of find value with Colts these days, based on everybody kind of jumping ship with the Wentz news. And I think people were already a little bit down on Taylor. I think that the fantasy football analyst community kind of pushed him down a little bit more, where he was already going like late first, early second, and now he's solidified as a second rounder. So I think you can find some value with these Colts right now. They're kind of getting drafted at their floors.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, the one player that I probably think might be, other than Jonathan Taylor, that might be possibly even helped or at least not hurt as bad is Paris Campbell. Assuming he can stay healthy, somebody who's operating a lot around the line of scrimmage and who can do, wildcat type stuff and jet sweeps and everything else, those kind of easy touches that make life simpler for your quarterback. I think that they're going to try to make as much use of that as they can. Nyheim Hines the same way. So, I think guys like that are going to help you out a little bit.
Hines is one of my 2 or 3 most owned running backs.
Yeah, it's just so hard to lay off him where he's going. I mean, he's got a role, and if anything happens to Taylor, I mean, that role mushrooms. So, Yeah, he's not going to be a feature back, but he would definitely take a much larger role in the offense for sure. What about that? And I guess the other thing I'd say is if I'm in a tournament like the FFPC, like their football guys or the main event that has a real short regular season, I'm kind of fading those Colts a little bit more. Because number one, you got the week 14 bye that's coming in, and that's going to happen during the playoffs. And the other thing is, if Wentz is out for several weeks, if the whole Colts offense is down for 2, 3, 4 weeks and just isn't performing well, that's a little bit more difficult to overcome if your season is 11 or 12 games. So that's something to think about there. But otherwise, I'm probably not really fading them too much at all. How about the week 14 bye for you guys? What does that do for you?
Well, I would say, first of all, to what you just said, I'd want a better discount,
right,
in the main event or in a football guys, right? Mm-hmm. But again, the good thing is one of the other changes this year is there's no bye weeks for, I think, 5 or 6 weeks, right? Where you used to start getting the byes in week 4. So there's going to be less need to churn your roster earlier in the season. So if I can get in the 18th, 19th, 20th round of a draft a Colt who I think has 13th, 14th, 15th round value, I'm still willing to do that. Now the week 14 thing is a big problem in the best ball tournament because it's an elimination week, right? Where in the football guys, it's your playoffs, your championship round where the money is, so that's important too. But even still, I think that's baked into ADP overall. And I just think what you have to do is if you make 10 teams, maybe have 1 or 2 where you have a cold stack. And what I've done with that is, like, if I have a Chiefs stack, I'll make a Colts stack in a best ball. Somewhat, where I have a really good, because they play the Raiders in week 14. So, give me a really, let's find a way. In other words, look, one of the things in life, forget about drafting, is find a problem and then find a solution around the problem. Right? Because if you get past that week 14, now you've got a uniqueness that a lot of people are going to be hesitant to have Colts stacks or Eagles stacks. Well, if you get through week 14 with a nice Mahomes stack, now you've got Mahomes, plus you've got a second team that's under-owned. I think that's an interesting way to counter-program the problem.
Yep.
Yeah, and for me, I think with week 14, if Jonathan Taylor falls to a point in the second round where you want to take him, that's fine. I just think you need to be careful about the guys that you draft the rest of the way. I'd be, if you're a Myles Gaskin guy, or a Damien Harris guy, or a Miles Sanders guy, you can't really have them on a team with Taylor. I think you're kind of playing with fire. It's kind of like the reverse of bye week stacking. You want to kind of avoid having too many guys from week 14. But again, it's a long season. People get very caught up in the end game without thinking about the fact that you do have to actually qualify for the playoffs in these leagues. So, I would just avoid having too many guys from that bye week, but I would certainly not worry when Taylor reaches a point in ADP that you're very, very, comfortable with.
Right. Exactly. All right. Let's turn our attention to COVID a little bit. That's also been in the news. We've got Kirk Cousins, who wants to build a plexiglass box in a bigger quarterback room. You've got Lamar Jackson, who's had COVID 2 times, but still needs to study it some more before he figures out whether he wants a vaccine. How are you guys handling the COVID vaccine and the NFL's rules around it? How is that impacting your drafts?
I would say that if a guy is stupid about COVID, all right, and if some of you are deniers out there, well, tough. But I've had too many friends have it and have real serious cases. Mm-hmm. But I would say this, Dan, you've heard me talk a lot about tiebreakers, right? If I have 2 guys that I like and I'm going to pick, and one's an idiot and one's not an idiot, well, then it's easy for me to pick the non-idiot. But I'm not going to drop a talented player a tier because they're not vaccinated and their chance of getting COVID is slightly greater. The NFL has done a very good job with these rules to try and limit the amount of COVID that's out there. I do think there's a very good chance you're also going to see another booster come out that's better against the Delta variant at some point during the season. So I'm not spending too much time thinking about this. It might be a mistake, but I'm just not gonna drive myself crazy.
Yeah, I'm not letting it enter the thought process at all. I mean, we all survived last season, which was, gloom and doom every single week. We thought all these games were going to be, postponed. We did have to deal with games being rescheduled, and the NFL made it through. And hopefully, you cashed last season, or at least did okay. I think that this year is going to be much, much better. I'm optimistic about things, and I'm optimistic about the fact that I think the NFL just gets it. They get games played, and I feel like we're not going to have nearly as many issues as last year. So I'm not looking into players' vaccination status or anything like that. I'm just drafting away for the best possible team I can build.
Yeah, I agree with that in general. And part of my thought is that, I just have a hard time seeing the NFL willingly causing a forfeit based on COVID. I mean, last year they kept threatening it, but it never happened. And there were no fans in the stands or anything else. This year, there's a lot of fans in the stands. Hopefully, most stadiums are going to be sold out or nearly so. And, to forfeit a game under those conditions, I think is even worse for the NFL this year. I think they're just trying to put as much pressure on the players as they can right now to try to get them to go ahead and get the jab. But I'm not worried about it really either. And I think that's probably the sharp way to go.
Yeah, when you got 80% vaccine rate on teams, it's much harder for it to just explode.
Exactly. And that's better than the general public in pretty much every state, probably every state.
And let's hope that we don't have any Kendall Hinton type situations for fantasy players to have to deal with next year as well.
Who's that?
Oh, that was the wide receiver who played quarterback for Denver that one game last year.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
that was a valid
question. Todd, is who is that?
The New Orleans defense play of the year that week.
Yep, exactly. All right, another guy who's been in the news. Last one, and then we'll get into the best ball topic that you're all here for. But let's talk about the New Orleans Saints a little bit. What are you guys doing with Michael Thomas? And when would you take him? I mean, I'll start off and I'll just say, he definitely is kind of starting to sound like a guy that doesn't really have a whole lot of interest in playing games for the Saints this year. delaying the surgery so that he's going to be several months in. You can just kind of see the AJ Green situation developing here, where he's going to go out to practice and, it's not quite right. I got to shut it down again this week. And, he just sits on the sidelines and collects his paychecks and, next year moves on. Where are you guys on Michael Thomas?
For me, he was one of my favorite players before. The only thing that saved me was that I liked a lot of other guys in the third round. But I was probably about 15% Michael Thomas. Since that happened, I've done at least 10 or 12 FFPC 125s, and I have one share. I think it was at 810. My thought process, and I had two great wide receivers already and a decent third. So I felt like, one of the things that you need to do when you play, whether it's when you do volume, no matter what the contest is, you have to build teams based on certain scenarios, right? And you do it with DFS as well. Well, what's the chance, Dan, that situation that you just laid out comes to fruition? Let's say it's a 20% possibility that he just has no interest and it's going to be 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks. And but what if we're wrong? Like, what's the chance that that's wrong? Well, whatever that calculation that you come up with in your head, you need to build that many teams for that scenario. Right. So if out of 10 teams, I have one Michael Thomas team where he's my third or fourth wide receiver at almost the 9th round, I'm not depending on him. And it was a really good team, too. It was one where I was getting a lot of value and I really felt like I was loaded for bear. I felt like I could afford to take a Michael Thomas share, because if that team does what I think it's going to do and get into the playoffs, if I could add Michael Thomas to that team, that's a great way to get to the top of the leaderboards. So that's kind of my thinking and my calculation.
Yeah, I've done what I could to get out of the Michael Thomas business in Dynasty. I won't have a whole lot of him in redraft. His tweet this week was, "They tried to damage your reputation. You saved theirs by not telling your side of the story." He's doing like these cryptic tweets. I just don't like where this is heading. I said I'll say that there's a chance he never plays a snap again for the Saints ever. He gets to like Todd said, though, you have to realize whether you're a high volume drafter or not. If you have to think about the fact that you're a high volume drafter or not, then you're not a high volume drafter. But if you're drafting enough teams, you might want to have some exposure to Michael Thomas. I think I'm more likely to have him in NFFC, which is another format I play, which is a start 3 wide receiver format, where he might be a little more appealing when he starts popping into like the 10th round. It seems to me that FFPC drafters are still a little bit more bullish on him than NFFC drafters are at this point. I'm not sure if that's just a small sample size that I'm noticing or not, but I don't know. The whole situation kind of scares the hell out of me. I will draft him occasionally, but most of the time I'm staying away.
We said the same thing in different ways.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think there's two scenarios where I'm interested in drafting him. One is I'm having a terrible draft and I feel like I've fallen behind the other drafters and I need a home run. And we're in the 9th, 10th round, and there he is. I might take that swing, and try to catch up. And the other one is the one that Todd was describing, where I feel like I'm crushing the draft, and this could be the thing that just really puts it out of reach. And I'm much more likely to do that in a contest league than a standalone league. If I'm in a standalone league and I'm crushing the draft, I'm probably going to leave Michael Thomas for somebody else. But if I'm in a contest where I know I'm going to be competing against thousands of people, I know I've got to do better than just kind of crushing my individual 12-person league. I've got to come up with a top 1% team or less. Okay, so let's let's get off the news. Let's get into the best ball. Something we all enjoy. And let's just start with Todd. What's your general approach to best ball? Do you have a philosophy that carries over from draft to draft?
Well, no. So the first thing I do is I look at the format and the rules. Okay. And then I'm going to come up with a strategy based on the format, the rules. So no, there are certain things that I have that I take from, no matter what. Like I'm a tier drafter, right? I use tiebreakers to make sure that my exposure is spread. My best 2 years in best ball, traditional best ball, not tournament, I never had more than 23% of one player. So you don't need to go crazy to with ownership. So So my tier drafting philosophy, the tiebreakers that I use to break ties, to give myself unique lineups within the tiers, that doesn't change. But pretty much everything else from a strategic standpoint does change.
Okay.
Based on where I'm drafting.
Makes sense. Theo, any thoughts on that?
No, I think it's a great approach by Todd, and I think that one thing that Todd made a great point of is you have to know your format. Not all best balls are kind of created equal, and knowing the scoring is one of the main things. And I thought 23% is a great number where you don't want to be all in on one guy. That can kind of ruin your season. I know for me, I'm over 30% on a couple of guys. I got to kind of pump the brakes. But I think that's a very disciplined way of drafting, and I think that's a takeaway that a lot of players should listen to.
Well, and the earlier, like my first two rounds, I don't want more than 15%. I know we're going to talk about win rates, and we can get into that then. But the best and worst win rates are almost always people in the first two rounds. In the first round, if a guy gets injured, you can have a 2% win rate, which is 4 times lower than average. You think, it's only 6 percentage points less than because you see 20 to 30% win rates, but almost every injured first round player has a 4% or lower win rate, right? So the chance, and this is a mistake I made the last 2 years. So I'm correcting, and basically what you want to do is, sure, you want to have favorites, but if you look at a tier, and let's say you've got Christian McCaffrey 30 points ahead of Dalvin Cook. That's a big deal, right? That seems like a lot, right? 30 points. It's less than 2 points a week, right? Compare that to the chance that one of them is going to get injured and be out for the season. Not that you can get 25% of Christian McCaffrey, but on guys, that go late in the first round, if you're taking them when you're up fourth, I have him as my 4th best player in the draft. So every time you have a chance between 4 and 12, 10, you're taking him, you're going to end up way overweight. And like me with Kenyon Drake last year, and it can create a problem because Kenyon Drake was hurt, and they cut his roll back. They didn't throw the ball to him, and the reason I liked him so much didn't play out, and I lost money last year.
Yep. That's happened to us all. A couple of years ago, I had a bad year in best ball where it was just the same thing. I was overweight on the wrong players, and you live and you learn, for sure. And I think one of the things we often talk about is you can't win your draft in the first couple of rounds, but you sure can lose it. And I think that carries a lot of weight. As you said, you can get some pretty good win rates in the first couple of rounds, but it's much more unusual to get a really good win rate than it is to get a really bad win rate. Like the players, the the number of players who are drafted in the first 2 rounds who have bad win rates usually outnumber the ones with better than average win rates by about 4 or 5 to 1. And
think about it this way, Dan. If you get a 20% win rate, anything over 20% is considered great, right?
Right.
So let's say you have 15% of a guy and he has a 20% win rate. Okay. Already just on one guy, you've won 3% of your leagues. Now, if you've also had good roster construction and other and you're good with your other player selections, I've had guys that had 20% win rates that I won 35% on. So when you're trying to get to 10% to be profitable for the year, 10 to 12% win rate, 15% is enough, right? Yeah. So
pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered, as they say.
Another fat joke. Fine.
I just keep slipping them in there. What can I say? All right. Let's move on to in specifically we kind of talked about the first 2 rounds here of best ball tournaments. Does your strategy change when you flip? Let's talk about the difference between FFPC and Underdog. How does your strategy change, Todd, between those 2 formats?
Well, I'm much more likely to try and get a unique build in Underdog. What I love about the FFPC tournament, sorry, I started by saying, $125. That's a little rich for my blood. I'll do 3 or 4 of them. And then I read the rules and I'm like, all right, I think I'll do 15 or 20. And then I read the rules again and I'm like, hey, Theo, you want to go in on a few? Hey, Billy, you want to go in on a few? And hey, Elliot, Chris, do you want to go in on a few? A couple guys that I know that don't even play best ball. Hey, you want 30% of chance, 30% of my prize pool? Pay 50%, you'll get it. So I'm now looking at 100 teams.
Wow. Which
is over 1% of the total tournament, right? And the reason I like it so much is that I'm a traditional old school best ball guy, and their setup is really good for what I know, right? Exposure, mixing your exposure, rock solid roster construction. Theo and I did a draft recently, and afterwards we looked at every team's roster construction, and 3 or 4 teams, maybe 5 or 6, at least 2 of them were dead in the water based on roster construction. And the other 4 were behind the 8 ball because they didn't have solid roster construction. And I'm not making the main point well. So once you get to the playoffs, 2 teams make the playoffs, and then there's 4 weeks, and the first 3 weeks, 3 out of 12 make it. So I don't need to chase a 1% outcome. I don't need to galaxy brain this. If I have a lot of good teams that are made well, when you get to a 4-week playoff, having good roster construction means, like everyone is into this 4 running back thing now because Justin Herzig won money with it last year. Well, what you don't know is that only 1.6% of teams used his 2-4-10-2 last year, and only 3.5% or 5% used 4 running backs at all. Now every draft has 2 or 3 guys doing this. The less unique an approach is, the less likely it's going to be successful. So I love this 3 advancing per week because I don't have to worry about, galaxy braining something. If I feel like if I have rock solid teams that, get me to week 12 with 1 or 2 teams and I will be very happy. Give me the chance to advance, and I'll be happy. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think that's a crucial difference between the FFPC contest and most of the others is that you do get, placed back into 12-team leagues for every week of the playoffs instead of being, part of an overall, where you're competing against, maybe, 500 teams in week,
Well, I
15
looked,
or whatever.
I looked what Underdog is, okay?
Okay.
I don't know
so
what DK, but Underdog, it's 12, 18, 18, 160. So you're going to be in a 12 team in the first, for the contest, then 18, 18, and 160 the last week. So, right. Again, get me to that last week and I'll take my chances. I think that people, you can galaxy, you have to advance for your fancy strategy to work. What worked for Justin Herzig was that he did 2, 4, 10, 2, but like 70% of his teams had that. So all he needed was 1 or 2 teams to have the right 4 running backs. And now with wide receiver going so much earlier than they did last year, again, to my point earlier, it's just much harder to find, everyone's trying to find that magic pill. The more they do that, the more I think good, solid construction and picking the right players will work.
Yeah, and I would recommend anybody enjoying this podcast, go and watch Todd's podcast where he, shows himself with Billy Muzio drafting a team in this contest. The structure, they're constantly talking about team structure, and team structure plays a huge role in your success in best ball. There's a lot of ways to just, like Todd said, to kind of defeat yourself, right away. You can avoid some of those mistakes if you follow some of these, better players and their strategies. You don't have to agree on all the players Todd likes, but you should absolutely be looking at the way he constructs a team.
Right. And like one simple one is that most people don't do. It's like, well, I like this wide receiver. And now it's this round. I like that wide receiver. Well, what's the portfolio, of your overall wide receivers on that team? If I draft a boomer bust guy in the 3rd round, let's say I draft a floor guy like Keenan Allen, right? I did a draft recently. And then in the 9th round, Hollywood Brown was there. This is before his hamstring that's going to cause him to lose at least 2 limbs and maybe an eyebrow. So I said, I'm going to take the boomer bust guy because I've got a nice floor at wide receiver. Really look at your position group. And just like daily fantasy, you want both as much floor and ceiling as you can get. You don't want, 7 Mecole Hardmans in one wide receiver room, right? It's too much variance, right? I always say that think of a mixed drink. Try and put just enough alcohol. The alcohol is your risk. Try and put just the right amount of risk into your team. Don't make it where it's a flat drink and it doesn't have enough risk, or that every player is Mecole Hardman with who's going to either score 3 or 20.
Yep, I think that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk. We kind of talked about a little bit about roster construction and ideal builds and all that, and what how everybody's kind of following the Justin Herzig model and Underdog. What are you seeing as being kind of an ideal roster construction for the Underdog tournament?
Well, I will go 4 running backs there because you can get 4 good ones in some drafts. But what I'm doing in Underdog is I'm making sure I take 2 really good running backs. In most of my drafts, I'm starting with 2 good running backs and a good wide receiver in the first 3 rounds. Because wide receivers are just ridiculously early right now, you want to make sure that you've got at least 5 solid, because you have to start 3 every week. You don't want... you don't want to be taking 8 wide receivers from rounds, 11 to 18. right? That's not going to win you a tournament. So I'm still trying to be balanced while scooping as much value on the draft board as I can.
Okay, that makes sense. Theo?
Yeah,
any thoughts on that?
I'll agree with Todd. It's a little crazy how heavy the wide receiver builds are. I prefer to go with a 4 running back build on Underdog, much like Todd. Occasionally, I've liked the way my team looks with a 5 running back build. Maybe I kind of punt running back a little bit more, and I'm able to kind of cover it up with 2 guys late. But generally, I'll agree with Todd. I like a 4 running back build with at least and hopefully 2, but 1 running back, which I'm very, very comfortable with.
Okay, sounds good. So let's switch it up. Let's talk FFPC slims. Todd, how does that change your ideal build? What are you looking for in a slim?
I do want to add one other thing, though, on Underdog. Mm-hmm. One of the big advantages you have, and I always get the question, well, why do you give away all your secrets? And I hate to say it, but most people aren't smart enough to do what I tell them. All right? I had a podcast with Justin, and he basically said 4 running backs. I want 4 that I can count on. Normally, I take them in the first 8 rounds. You go and look at draft boards, and you see all these teams constantly doing 4 running backs with 2 early, 1 in the 11th round, and some guy in the 18th round that would need a miracle of God to give you points, right? That's not doing Justin's strategy. You see teams all the time doing 0 running back that wait till like round 11 to take a running back, right? I mean, again, you're going to need a miracle for that to work, right? So one thing I will say is if you're going to read up on a strategy, take notes and make sure you really understand what that high-level smart guy is telling you. Because, you guys are just throwing money at my feet when you take these strategies and don't do them correctly. It's the number one thing I want the people out there to realize is that you are just bleeding money if you don't do a unique strategy the right way.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think the other thing we have to keep in mind, it doesn't matter what format you're on, whether you're on Underdog or FFPC or NFFC, any of it. You've got to, especially early in the draft, take what the room gives you. If you go into it thinking I want to go 0 running back, but the room is just handing you running backs because too many other people in the room are trying to do a 0 running back, it's time to zag. Take those running backs, especially if you're doing volume. You've got to get on there and just let the first 3, 4, 5 rounds come to you, get what you get, and then start figuring out your strategy. Because again, it comes down to, any strategy can win if you draft the right players. And if the room is handing you the right players, don't pass them on to the next guy. Take them. That's basically what I see on that.
Yeah, I mean, when I see some of the famous 0 running back guys in the industry in one of my drafts, what I do is I'll take 2 great running backs early, and then I will just, again, load up on wide receivers and tight ends, maybe take a quarterback, because I want to be in the business of sniping them on their 0 running back candidates. So I still got 3 running back slots to fill, right? Well, I'm going to be taking your best 0 running back candidates, but I'm not counting on them to win the league for me because I got 2 stud running backs. But I've taken almost as many good wide receivers as you. I've got great running backs. I've slipped in at least 1 good wide receiver or tight end, and now I'm sniping you on your running backs at least 2 or 3 times. Then I hear these guys podcast and they go, "It was a tough room. We really didn't get our candidates." Yeah, you didn't.
That's too funny. So let's jump back to those slims. Do you have any thoughts on ideal roster construction there?
I do. If you study the work that Mike Beers has done, historically 2 or 3 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 7 or 8 wide receivers, and 2 or 3 tight ends for the old BB 10s,
Yep.
that we all did. The difference between the winning percentage of a 2 and 3 quarterback build is very slight. Okay. So again, it comes down to Scott Barrett did a phenomenal article on when to take your 2 if you're doing 2 and when you should take 3. When you should take a 6th running back, when you should take an extra tight, the 3rd tight end. If you take Travis Kelce, don't take 3 tight ends. Maybe in the FFPC, maybe because that 3rd tight end might be a flex for you. That changes the game a little bit. But if I take one of the top 6 or 7 quarterbacks, there's no way that I'm taking 3. If I take Tom Brady and Ryan Tannehill, I'm done, right? 2 medium, top 15 guys. The win rates for that 2 top 15 guys is phenomenal, right? It's a little bit more than just 1%. But overall, everyone, comes to these conclusions that are wrong. And some people are like, I would never draft 3 quarterbacks. I had a really, really smart guy that everyone looks up to in the high-stakes community tell me I was an idiot for taking 3 quarterbacks. Well, I didn't take my first one till like round 14 or 15, right? I am more than happy to take a 3rd quarterback in there, and I get it. They think that you're not going to advance in the playoffs. But to me, again, because 3 teams advance each week, I want the most balanced overall construction as possible. Now, if I had to, gun to my head, say what my favorite is, it's 2-5-9-2. That's my favorite on these 18 rounders. But I am more than willing to have 3 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, 6 running backs, anywhere from 7 to 10 wide receivers, and 2 or 3 tight ends in one of these drafts, if that's what's best for my team.
Makes sense. Theo, what do you have to add to that?
No, I generally agree with Todd. I prefer.
There's a lot of that going around. I like you, Theo.
I've drafted with
that's why we're good partners.
We generally don't argue too much. Occasionally we're on maybe the turn and we're easy 1 pick and then we have to talk about the second one. But then it never gets to arguing. No, it's never arguing. It's more kind of an analytical conversation, which it should be. And I'll agree. I prefer the 2 quarterback build. I do think you can do it with a 3 quarterback build if it's very late. There's a couple of appealing guys, if you wanted to go with a Taysom Hill build or a Zach Wilson type, you can get those guys so late that you can really build a roster that way. But I'm not afraid of a 3 tight end build. But generally, I try to stay with the 2 quarterback build. I think you'll like the way your teams look for the most part that way. And I'm a sucker for wide receivers. I want to have, some guys that are going to have a rock solid floor for me every week, as well as some of these higher variance guys you're going to get a little bit later on in the draft. I like having a KJ Hamler type to end a draft, those kind of guys. So yeah, I'll generally agree with Todd on his roster construction.
You spelled Byron Pringle wrong.
Different ways to skin a cat.
No, I like Hamler too. I'm just teasing you.
Yeah, no, I like Pringle as well, but Hamler's kind of like that guy that 18th round comes around and I end up taking KJ Hamler in a number of these.
For me, lately, it's been MVS. Because that's a guy who's got enough. He's fine at ADP if he's just does what he's done before. But now you're hearing that he's catching the ball better. I hate that because now his ADP is going to go up. It was a blurb today, but I've gotten up to about 20% of MVS because, he's the kind of guy who takes the roof off.
Yeah, and one guy we were talking about a little bit in the pre-show that's starting to rise up is Diamie Brown, who's a little bit, potentially his role would be a little bit more than those guys we're talking about. He's still going late, but it's the same premise. We're a talented guy that we're expecting will have maybe a couple of boom weeks. So it doesn't take a whole lot for those late round guys to really pay off.
And you want someone, all the guys that we mentioned have a good floor if nothing happens, but they have the talent, right? You just don't want to take that's one thing that Byron Pringle really doesn't have, but he's got a quarterback that's so good that if he ends up starting every week, he could be a guy who could give you 7th, 8th round value. But in general, you're looking for talented players who don't have the opportunity, so that if the opportunity presents itself, they can crush.
Yeah, I think with a guy like Pringle, the main difference between him and MVS is Pringle really kind of needs somebody in front of him to fail, whereas MVS, I don't really think needs anybody in front of him to fail because he's not running the same kind of routes as Cobb. He's not, he never has, taken a bite out of Devontae Adams' target share. That's never going to happen. And, so you've got a guy like this who, if he just keeps doing what he's doing and he's got a quarterback like what he's got, it just all the pieces fall into place. And you're not asking Valdez-Scantling to carry your team. You're asking him to chip in. If he chips in 3 or 4 good weeks, it's a win. If he chips in 5 or 6 good weeks, it's a big win. So you just have to be cognizant of what you need players to do at different positions, at different points of the draft. And, that's one of the things, that both of you guys were really hitting on without exactly saying is that you have to look at how much draft capital you've put into a position when you're deciding how many players you want to have at that position. If you put a lot of draft capital into running back, you can get by with as few as 3 if you really want to get crazy, but 4 or 5 is, probably the max you want to get. But if you are not putting that draft capital in, you might need to go 6 or 7 running backs. If you go, like a full 0 running back build and you've got nothing but wide receivers early, you're going to want a lot of shots at running back late. And same thing with tight end and quarterback. I tend to, for the most part, I either go earlier at tight end or earlier at quarterback, but I try not to go earlier at both because then I feel like I'm kind of hurting myself at either wide receiver or running back. But now I've got hopefully one of each elite. Maybe, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to only have 2 of each, right? 2 quarterbacks, 2 tight ends. But I kind of like the way my teams come out. If I go with 1 early quarterback and then a later one, and then maybe go 3 late tight end, or if I go with an early tight end, I'll probably go, 2 mid-round quarterbacks, or else like what Todd does, and sometimes go 3 late-round quarterbacks, because at that point, you've already gotten that extra bite at the apple at running back or wide receiver where everybody else was getting a quarterback. And now you can, later on, you're taking a quarterback who's probably going to have a much better chance of contributing, in round 14, 15, 16, whatever, than the equivalent wide receiver running back that you get at that point. So there, to me, there's nothing wrong with the 3 late quarterbacks.
2 things I want to throw in on that, Dan. Mm-hmm. One is I never go into a draft hoping for 3 quarterbacks.
Right.
The reason I end up with 3 quarterbacks is because I'm getting such good value at the other positions every round that it just doesn't make sense to take the quarterback who's on the board at that time. Right. So I've got a team that I think is really good. And so now I want to take 3 quarterbacks. Hopefully all 3 of them have stack potential to maximize. I don't need 9 wide receivers if I've gotten 8 phenomenal ones. Right. So I can take that third quarterback instead of that. I guess my point is don't be dogmatic. And then the second point I want to make is another huge mistake I see is people doing 0 running back drafts and only having 4 or 5 running backs. So you haven't drafted one until round 9, and now you've only got 4 or 5 of them, right? Like, I mean, I'll go 7 running backs in a 0 running back build if I feel I need to, right? Because if I've started the draft with 7 wide receivers, 2 great tight ends, and a good quarterback, then all I need for that team to win is to get enough points out of my running backs to be successful. So again, your roster construction needs to change based on your draft capital and the strategy that you're using.
Yep,
and I think that was a great point by Todd. We're actually in the middle of a draft now where we took George Kittle in the 2nd round. Kyle Pitts fell to us in the 3rd round. And
the end of the 3rd, like 311. Like 311.
Yeah, exactly, 311 on the nose. I have it right here. And then we get to the 7th round, and Noah Fant falls to 711. So
he's been going in the 5th round in some drafts.
Yeah,
in that format.
And I'm very high on Fant, as you are. And we kind of changed our strategy mid-draft. Noah Fant gets drafted. We now have a 3 tight end build and a team that's very dangerous so far in the draft. So don't be dogmatic. You can have a preference, but don't be, stuck to it where, I really want to take this guy. He's the best value on the board. However, I must stick to this specific plan. Plans change. Your plan should always be to have the best team.
And one of the big things, Theo, and Dan, that most people, the biggest mistake I find that people make on the FFPC is they don't account for the difference between starting 3 wide receivers with 1 flex and 2 wide receivers with 2 flexes. So, I could just see someone out there in listening land saying, 3 tight ends in this first 7th round. Well, all 3 of those guys could score points for us every week because 1 tight end starts and 2 tight ends can be our flexes. So what we've created is where we took great value on the 2nd and 3rd tight end. We kept that value from some other team. And now because we know how to build a team, we're going to be able to adapt and cover our weaknesses, move the chess pieces around to help support that 3 tight end build.
Yep, exactly. Perfectly stated. That's exactly what you want to do. You have to be aware of what your roster requirements are and what you can do within the limitations of those. And, some formats are more limiting than others. And with the FFPC, there are a bunch of different ways where you can build those teams. Whereas, as you said, in other rooms, in other formats, you wouldn't dare make a build like that. So, Todd, you kind of alluded to stacking a little bit earlier. Let's talk stacking in the various formats. How are you doing it? How much is too much? How much is too little? What do you like to do on stacking?
Biggest thing that I've learned, and I wish I could credit whose tweet it was. But someone did the research, and you don't want all 3 wide receivers on the same team. You might think you do. Now, again, there's always exceptions to rules. If the 3rd wide receiver is an 18th round guy and he's the best guy on your board, take him. But in general, I want and then the other big thing is, and this was something Justin talked about on our podcast, build stacks without the quarterbacks within your team, right? So like I've taken Chris Godwin and Mike Evans and hoping to get Tom Brady, but it didn't work out that I got Tom Brady. Well, that stack is still just as viable if I took them at value. So I am looking not only to mix in stacks with my quarterback, I'm looking to have other stacks within my team. And my biggest thing is I'm looking for value every pick. first thing Theo and I do when we get on the clock together is who fell to us, right? Mm-hmm. You know, and can we find a way to take that value and make it work within our construction? So that would be my answer, Dan. I'm not only looking to stack quarterbacks, but again, I use it as a tiebreaker. I won't go up or down a tier to do a stack, except very rarely. And in general, I'm trying to get as much correlation into my builds as possible without making mistakes.
Yeah, I would highly recommend anyone who wants more information just on stacking to listen to last week's GOAT District with my friend Josh Larkey. And I highly recommend Josh's article that came out on Player Profiler, which was Josh's basically one of the best stacking articles you're ever going to read. But I think that Todd makes a great point about correlation. It doesn't always have to be the quarterback. There's positive correlation when you take a Tyreek Hill and you follow up with a Byron Pringle late in the draft. And I think one thing that Todd does very, very well is he has an eye towards the end game, where one thing that I've tried to emulate is a Kansas City-Cincinnati game, Week 17. It's a great thing to have double exposure to a game that we can look on the schedule and kind of project to be a high-scoring game. I know we have an Atlanta-Buffalo game late in the year as well. That's kind of the next level of stacking, and it's a little more DFS thinking than some players are used to, but I think it's kind of taking it to the next level. And one thing I also like to do is I really do like to try to make sure we have at least one pass catcher with the quarterback you draft. You get a little more double exposure in that sense. But yeah, it's some great stuff from Josh Larkey last week.
He's a very bright guy. I like him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, for sure. Yeah, yep. I think to me, when you're in the early rounds, again, you just want to start your builds with the idea of exposing yourself to as many different potential stacks as possible. In that, you don't want to be reaching, like Todd was saying. You got to stick to your tiers, and you don't want to reach up a tier, hardly ever. Unless there's just some really compelling reason. But for the most part, if you've done a good job of kind of potentially setting up different stacks, one or two of them are going to fall to you just naturally. Rather.
I think Dan froze up.
Yeah, so I'll throw in one thing, Theo.
Yeah,
is that it's really important to have in your mind one of the key things that I'm doing, because quarterbacks are going much earlier. I mentioned that earlier, that the quarterbacks are going much earlier this year. If I take a top 6 quarterback, the way I'm trying to get an advantage over the rest of the field is by not taking my second quarterback to the end. So there's 3 or 4 teams that are really easy to stack late. Well, one you have to take fairly early, but Sam Darnold and Carolina, it's very easy if you've got one of the guys there. The Raiders are really good. Now Edwards is moving up, but for a while you could get Ruggs in the 14th, Edwards in the 17th and Carr in the 16th. Nobody's drafting Hunter Renfrow, and he's the starting slot. And he's had spike weeks where he's given 2 touchdowns. Another one is the Jets, with Zach Wilson late. So, if you're not getting the stacks that you want with your first quarterback, I start thinking about, okay, plan B, how can I build in a second? And this is what Theo was alluding to about how I'm strategic in the way we're building our teams. But at the same time, I'm willing to not have a stacked up team once in a while if it just doesn't work out. But in general, make sure you've got 3 or 4 late teams where you say, hey, I can, and that's where I will reach a half round or a round, right? Like if Edwards was going in the 17th round and I knew I could get Carr in the 16th, well, I might take Carr in the 15th and Edwards in the 16th, right? To get that stack, because late giving up a round of value isn't a big deal. It's all dart throws back there. So at that point, the correlation will make up for the value that I gave up by moving up to do it.
And shout out to Andrew Geller, aka the Guilds, an FFPC and an FFC grinder, very good drafter. And Andrew has been attacking the Bears stack in pretty much every Football Guys draft you do with him. He comes away with some part of Justin Fields, Mooney, Kmet. What are your takes on the Bears stack at this point, Todd?
I think that's pretty sharp, and I was just kicking myself today because I feel like Fields goes a little earlier than I would want him to for a guy who might not play until week 5 or 6, right? I mean, it really does look like Andy Dalton is going to have a shot. And, you know, look, one of the key things to also understand is these coaching situations, right? You have rational coaching and you have irrational coaching. That Bears coaching staff, I could see them being dogmatic. And if they're 4-4 and Andy Dalton's playing reasonably well, I could see them continuing until they're, 4-5. And then all of a sudden, Justin Fields is playing week 9. Well, in a tournament where if you take him in the 13th round and in a best ball, and you mentioned Andrew's doing that, the Guilds is doing that in a season-long league, it's a different animal, right? I'm much more willing to do it there because I get to pick my starters every week. But in a best ball, you could be if you understand historically your chances of getting first or second place, if you're 9th after 3 or 4 weeks, your chances are almost zero, right? It's like 2 or 3% chance you're going to advance if you're in 9th place or worse after 3 or 4 weeks. So just keep that in mind too when you're drafting best ball.
I think that's a great point on stacking. In a Football Guys type setting versus a FFPC best ball tournament type setting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Kmet's one of my most owned guys, and I feel that I missed. I was a little too dogmatic on Mooney. I liked him, but there always seemed to be someone else I liked more at that point, and I do worry about that offense overall. But in a FBG, when, if you can keep Fields on your bench until week 4, any of these quarterbacks, Trey Lance, these guys with legs, when you get them late, they can be tournament winners.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
I'll say that. I'm sorry, Dan, go ahead.
No, I just want to add in, with Fields, I think, it kind of goes back to Todd's point a while back that you just, with Michael Thomas, that you just have to decide what's the percentage chance that he's going to be starting, say 13 games or something like that. Whatever you think you need out of him to make it a viable roster. And if you think that's a 25% chance, then, you need to reflect that in how you draft him. If you think it's a 50% chance, then you're going to be much more aggressive with them, So you just have to look at it that way. And as far as Mooney goes, just to throw in, I sure liked him a lot better when his price was cheaper. Now that he's coming up the draft boards, it's a little bit more difficult for him to pay off. But I'm definitely, I like that I've got a lot of cheap Mooney out there to go with my Kmet and some cheap Justin Fields. So there's. The Bears stack has been good. I could definitely see a point this offseason if Fields continues to get a lot of positive buzz where it might get a little bit tougher to get a good Bears stack. So if you've got him in your pocket, I think it's a great thing.
I got a question for you guys. We've really seen with the news a lot of guys like Edwards, for instance. I was getting him in the 17th, 16th round. Now he's going in the 13th. I was taking a lot of Callaway last week in the 17th round. Now you see him in the 13th, 14th round. Who are you guys liking in those last couple rounds that hasn't had a blurb? And I mean, we talked about Hamler a little bit, but with those guys moving up, is there anybody moving back that you guys like late?
I mean, the guys like. I can speak for kind of multiple formats here. I enjoyed Terrace Marshall when he was going late, and I was able to get him in a number of drafts. Now it's starting to correct itself. Dan brought up Paris Campbell. I try to take Paris Campbell when he's available late. I think that there hasn't really been a correction on Paris Campbell. I think it could happen this month, where he's the kind of player where people could get excited about if we start seeing some blurbs or maybe he flashes in a preseason game. But, yeah, I would say Paris Campbell. I have plenty of Rondell Moore. I'm a huge Rondell Moore guy, but the market has kind of corrected itself where he's not going super late. Yeah, I mean, I will say that fantasy football has kind of corrected itself on rookie wide receivers in general. I think the success we've seen the last 2 seasons, we're just not going to get guys super duper cheap. I think on Ross Brown, who we've drafted together, Todd, you're starting to see him become a hype guy in camp. I could see his ADP rising, over the next week or two. He looks like he might be the best wide receiver in Detroit.
Which isn't saying much.
It does not say much at all, but someone's going to end up being usable of that mash crew of a wide receiver group. So yeah, I think some of those names kind of stand out to me, but I will say that the market seems to be correcting itself a little bit better on wide receiver values, at least in my mind, this offseason than it did maybe last offseason.
I'll throw one name out that I think people. We're finally starting to get a clue on, and then he sat out a couple days, and now he's back in the 17th round is AJ Green. I feel like his, that's one where the news cycle is in your favor value-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny that Arizona wide receiver 2 and 3 could end up returning a lot of value, and. Like you said, AJ Green. Now Christian Kirk is going almost free. He's taking a knock in camp. It sounds like people kind of overreacted to that. I actually had back-to-back picks on the team I was splitting with Nelson Sousa in the NFFC the other day, and we took Christian Kirk and AJ Green back-to-back very late in the draft. And I thought that was a nice strategy that might pay off. Everybody's excited about Rondell Moore, as they should be, but I think there's a range of outcomes where AJ Green is a very useful player this season.
We're actually on the clock, Theo.
Nice. Well, I'm going to let you guys look at that. That's a best ball league, right?
Yeah.
What are the
we're up at pick 9-11.
We've got right now.
Yep, we've got Tom Brady at quarterback. We've got Kareem Hunt. This was our 3 tight end team.
This is the 3 tight end team.
So we've got only Kareem Hunt and Gaskin at wide receiver and only Mike Evans and Tyreek Hill at wide receiver. So Brady, Hunt, Gaskin, Evans, Hill, Kittle, Fenton, Pitts. Man, I love this team.
This team is fun. This team's a lot of fun if those running backs hit. So I would be of the opinion that it would be a somewhat boring pick, but I do think that Zach Moss is somewhat appealing here. I would say that if we don't go Moss, one of the 2 Miami wide receivers would make a little sense here. Which way are you thinking?
So the first thing I do when I'm at pick 9-11, and Theo, we're doing a show, so it's easy to go without. But the guy who's in between us, Mr. Bill, has a 2 quarterback, 1 running back, 3 wide receiver, and 2 tight end build. So he's much more likely to take the running back than the wide receiver. So we want to kind of plan these next 2 picks. So the top running backs on the board are Zach Moss, Fournette, and David Johnson, and you could say Pollard too. Now, I'm not a Moss guy, but a lot of people are. So let's look at bye weeks. See, one of our let's see where our 2 running backs have bye weeks. All right, so we've got a week 13 and a week 14. So I'm good with Zach Moss for this pick. And then I'm going to throw out another name. I like Waddle if he makes it back. Mooney is there. But we were talking about Michael Thomas earlier. If I could get Michael Thomas as a 3rd wide receiver in a build with all this talent at 10-2, that's pretty tempting to me, Theo.
Yeah, I mean, I think with this team, it would be kind of like the potential icing on the cake to take Thomas. Yeah.
But I think we should go. I think we have to go running back here, and then if he comes.
My lean would be Moss. I just think that he's going to have a weekly floor. Dan and JD and I took him in the draft we did, the one where that Billy Muzio organized, and
we'll forget it then, because I won that. I won that league, so
I don't know. Our wide receiver room is very scary in that.
I haven't even looked. My team is okay. It's not great. Yeah, we're good. Let's. I'm going to lock in Moss, and then we've planned out, one of Waddle. So we're down. All right. So this is what I love. We're at the 11th pick. We need a running back, and we want a wide receiver too. We're going to take the running back, and he can only take 2 wide receivers. Let's say he fools us, and takes Michael Thomas and the other wide receiver, Waddle, then we still get Mooney. So, we're setting ourselves up to get a really good player coming back by taking Moss here. So I'm going to lock it in.
Yeah, let's lock up Moss.
There you go. So, while you guys are locking that in, another one Guilds is talking about is Tony. I think that's definitely, he's a guy I would take late. I wouldn't want to grab him if he starts creeping up too far. But I think there's still quite a few wide receivers that people are sleeping on. We talked about a couple of them earlier. MVS, I think, is still going plenty late in drafts. Diamie Brown is still going plenty late in drafts. Nico Collins, somebody who's probably going to get quite a bit of run in Houston.
I've been drafting him.
Yeah. Dwayne Eskridge, you were talking about, players who are on the downside of the news cycle. Eskridge is one who's on the downside of the news cycle right now. It's a long season. So, I don't mind drafting guys like that in the, 25th, 26th, 27th round of the full 28 round drafts, and I don't mind drafting them in the 17th or 18th round of the slims.
I will also throw in that that the Giants late. You can get Daniel Jones very late. Mm-hmm. Sterling Shepard looks like he might still be the number 1 there, and even if he's a solid number 2. Kadarius Toney is there, and Slayton's there too. So if you want to throw, if you're building 20 teams and you want 3 giant stacks, you can mix and match which ones go with Daniel Jones, and you can get it very, very late.
Yep. And a couple more. Adam Humphries has a connection with Ryan Fitzpatrick from back in the Tampa Bay days. And, we've heard some news in camp that that connection has been strong. D.D. Westbrook, I think, is kind of an interesting player in Minnesota, especially if you're –
I drafted him once.
if you're shut out on the Minnesota players. Thielen is not young, and Justin Jefferson is hurt right now. And Westbrook is still going in the last round of pretty much any draft if he gets drafted at all. And this is a player who is what's the wide receiver award in college? I'm blanking on the name, but the one I'm talking about.
It's not the Doak Walker.
No, it's the Blitnikoff.
Blitnikoff, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a guy who's got, a really good pedigree. So, those are the kind of guys that I like to get in the last rounds. And, there's still plenty of them. The nice thing about wide receiver is no matter who ends up getting shoved up the board, it means somebody else is getting shoved down most likely. And a lot of times, as we talked about very early in the podcast, guys are getting shoved down boards for no reason really whatsoever, other than just, that's the way the news cycle is trending right now. But, it's a long preseason, it's a long season. So, if unless you're getting that steady drumbeat of news that says negative, why don't take it too seriously. Are you guys on the clock again?
No, it was another draft.
Different one. Okay.
With Elliot Christ.
All right. Sounds good. So let's, we're over up to an hour and a half already, but, I think we've talked about a lot of players that we like already. If there's anybody else you guys want to throw out quickly that you have a large ownership on, or that you see people making mistakes on, we can do that quick. And then let's just hit win rates real quick before we get out of here.
I feel like I've thrown out enough names to bless the audience.
There you go.
Yeah, I think we've hit a lot of them. Go Antonio Gibson. I'm very much exposed to Antonio Gibson now in many formats.
Yep, exactly. I'm the same way. I have probably too much Gibson right now. And
Joe Mixon, end of the second round. CEH, end of the second round. I mean, it's just criminal right now. If you get one of the first two picks, you get one of those guys. You get someone amazing coming back, and then you can get A.J. Brown or Keenan Allen in the beginning of the third. You're starting off, if you play your cards right, you're starting off with a huge advantage.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got a question in the queue.
Oh, have we seen an update on Bateman today?
It's a groin. You're not going to know for. Those things can be anywhere from 1 week to 5 weeks, but they said he crashed to the ground in pain. So I don't think you're going to see him in the preseason. And I think with a rookie, that's going to push him back a little bit.
With groin injuries, it's a grade scale. So if you see a grade 1, that's very good news. Grade 2, you can kind of deal with it. And grade 3 would be kind of catastrophic for the start of his season. So you should probably see something.
It means your balls really hurt.
Yeah. It's tough to move around.
You have crushed your balls. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that.
but
it's not good.
If it's a grade 3, I suspect they will be putting him on the PUP list at least, and maybe IR. I mean, IR doesn't mean what it used to mean, because now, anybody can come off after 3 weeks. But, I think Bateman is at best one of those players that you hope is going to be there for you at the end of the season. And it's going to definitely, it should push him down a couple rounds from where he has been.
And if it is a grade 3, we'll be talking about Tylan Wallace, who
right,
that fell in draft, and it will all come full circle.
You are on the clock.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Tylan Wallace is a guy who I thought went way too late in the NFL draft, but what do we know? So Todd, let's go out talking about win rates just for a couple minutes.
Sure. One of my favorite subjects.
Yep. First off, just kind of give us a brief recap on, for those who don't know, how do win rates work? What are they? And, what do you see as being the value in them?
What a win rate is percentage of teams that a player was on the winning roster. All right. So I find them to be extremely helpful. I had somebody tell me that they weren't someone really supposedly smart on Twitter tell me that, I think it was Chad, tell me that win rates mean nothing. Well, A, he's not a best ball guy. He's a season-long guy. And B, I use it for best ball. It's best ball win rates, right? Mm-hmm. And one of his arguments was, well, there's no context to that win rate. Well, sure there is, because I remember the context of there's a few things you look for. A win rate can be pushed up if there's a lot of injuries right around you. So, like last year when McCaffrey and Barkley got hurt, Kamara went 2 picks after them. So he got a huge bump in a win rate because of the injuries around him. But what you can do is find little opportunities. Like a few years ago, I did a really in-depth search on win rates, and it got me on the whole spike week thing, because I noticed the guys who had spike weeks at quarterback who had put up these 30, 35-point weeks, their win rate didn't make sense in comparison to their overall fantasy points. That's one example. Another example this year is I saw that Pat Mahomes had like a 10.7% win rate. Well, all right, so now let's analyze that a little more. Well, he was going in the beginning to middle third round most of the time last year. Well, you can get him now in the mid fourth round. Meanwhile, the rest of the top quarterbacks used to go in the 6th to the 8th round. They're now going in the 5th and the 6th round. So you've seen it compress. And so I look at a guy like Mahomes, who had a 10.7% win rate, and his ADP is later, and the other quarterbacks near him are going earlier. And to me, that says there's a lot of value in drafting Pat Mahomes in the 4th round, because, but you'll hear again the old logic. Well, you don't draft the first quarterback. Well, the reason you didn't draft the first quarterback is because you could get someone almost as good 3 to 4 rounds later. Now that those guys who are almost as good are going 1 round later, why not take the top guy? So I am, at one point I had 15% in the tournament on Mahomes, and that's leveled out a little bit. But those are a couple examples of how you can use logic exercises with win rates to find buying opportunities.
Right. I think that's very important. And, I think one of the best ways you can use a win rate is to just look at, you were talking about context, and to me, that's entirely what win rates are about, is to be able to look at a guy who had a good win rate, a 15% win rate or a 12% win rate, whatever it was, and look at the context of how did they achieve that win rate. And then you look at this year and, instead of saying, well, James Robinson had a 20% win rate, that doesn't mean anything for James Robinson this year. What that means is that's the archetype of what you're looking for. You're looking for somebody who could become a James Robinson, somebody who's going to be super cheap, running back, late, who could fall into a ton of opportunity. Or whatever, you can pick any kind of player that you want. Usually there's a tight end or 2 or 3, especially in FFPC, that go late that have an outsized win rate because they're getting a ton of targets. They got into a situation where they were one of the top options on their offense. And so they're getting all those targets, and all of a sudden they get these ton of targets. They get a ton of catches. The FFPC is 1.5 PPR. So you want to look for those players, like I'm always looking for tight ends who have an opportunity where they can get an outsized target share for one reason or another. Maybe it only takes an injury. Maybe it just takes a player to, underperform what we think he's going to do. Maybe it's a quarterback that, his quarterback is, we think might do great things and bring the tight end along for the ride, but those are the kind of things you want to look for, to me, with win rate. Any thoughts on that?
I got 2 more for this year, Dan.
Okay.
Do you mind?
No.
All right. So 2 more that I used this year. Everyone's down on Josh Jacobs. You might as well make a show. Everyone hates Josh, right? But he had a 7.8% win rate last year. Now, that's not a great win rate, but it's barely under break even. And he was going at an ADP of 14 last year. Okay. Now you can get him in the 5th and sometimes 6th round. and his role isn't very different than it was last year. So to me, if he could almost break you even last year at an ADP of 14, then I am more than willing to. I'm not going to be heavy on him. I don't think he's a tournament winner, but in certain builds, to be able to get a good, solid second or third running back at that point is something that I have interest in. The other one had to do with backup running backs. And because I noticed Tony Pollard was going in early best balls, 8th, 9th round, right? Well, his win rate was okay, but he was going almost 2 rounds earlier than where he went last year to get that win rate. Meanwhile, Latavius Murray and Madison of the Vikings had almost the same win rates, but they were going 2 to 3 rounds after where they went last year. So that said to me that Madison and Latavius were values because they were going 2 rounds after where they went last year, and their win rate was good last year. And Pollard, whose win rate was good but not great, going 2 rounds earlier, I think people were a little too enthusiastic about his talent and were projecting more than what they might actually get. So those would be a couple other examples of how I used win rate to find opportunities or to help me to feel better about fading a talented guy like Tony Pollard.
There you go. All right. Well, we're at an hour and 40 minutes, and
Are you surprised with me on the show that it went long?
Oh man, and the Goat District always goes long. It's kind of our hallmark at this point. But we have great guests and we get into great conversations, and it's just the way it goes. So we're more than happy to spend a little bit of extra time, delving deep into the fantasy football world and trying to find you ways to win. We're not just scratching the surface; we're getting down there. So, Todd, why don't you tell us again where they can find you? I think anybody who's been watching or listening to this podcast is definitely has to understand why it is that we wanted to get you on here and get you talking about best ball. I mean, you're super knowledgeable on it, and so tell us again where we can find you, what you got going on these days, and anything else you want to share.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate you having me on, Dan. You've always been like a rock toward me, and I appreciate you very much. Theo, I really enjoy our new partnership, and I'm hoping our teams do really well. Thank you very much for having me on. At Best Ball NFL, I changed it from Todd from PA, although I use Todd from PA still in the name. I think this is a little more catchy. And I do the Run to Daylight podcast occasionally still. So thank you guys. And I will be doing a lot with DFS this year too. So excited with that. I'll be working with 1 week season, and I just signed to do some things with Draft Sharks. Looks like I'm going to be doing some things with Draft Sharks as well. So very excited about that. Thanks.
That's awesome. This was a blast. This was a really, really good show. I really enjoyed this, Todd.
Theo, couldn't think any more highly of you.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
All right. Theo, anything else from you?
No, this was great. We're going to be back here in 2 nights with Dwayne Mcfarland of PFF. The first episode with Dwayne Mcfarland earlier this summer was excellent. Like Todd said, he's one of the sharper guys around, and it should be another great show for us this week. 2 really good ones.
Yep, absolutely. And, again, I just got to say what a pleasure it was having Todd on, the guy who broke me into podcasting. That was a lot of fun back in those days. And I just really appreciate the start that you gave me. We've been, Todd and I have been good friends for a long, long time. And, there's just very few people.
I saw something in you, Dan, that someone else was able to take to the next level. And but it's based on who you are and what you bring to the table. So congratulations.
I appreciate that, Todd. Like I say, we've been friends for a long, long time, and that's something I'm very, very proud of. So
yeah, me as well. You were there for me through some dark days.
Yeah, well, I'm more than happy to do that, and before it gets too mushy and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm going to cry. Please shut off my mic and dislocate me from the video, because I will never stop talking on my own.
Oh man, that's good. All right, but anyway, thanks to all of our listeners. Make sure you're smashing that like button, subscribe, be checking out the Goat District every week. Be watching for Todd.
If you don't, Theo will crush your spleen.
No.
Fine here.
A very friendly guy. Very friendly guy.
And be watching for those Run to Daylight podcasts. Just because they don't happen often doesn't mean that they're not good. They're fantastic. I mean, it just means the information is even more concentrated in there. They've all been a blast to watch for me, and so make sure that you're checking them out as well. So again, smash that subscribe button, hit the like button, keep tuning in, and we'll keep bringing you the goodness so you can win your leagues every year.
Go District. Bleed, I ball. Bleed, I ball. Bleed, I ball. Bleed, ball, and I bleed, I ball. Yeah. Bleed, I ball. It's the Go District, y'all. I ball, cause I bleed. Hey, bleeding, I ball. Defeated the odds, didn't see him at all. JD in the pies, I needed it all. I bleeded a lie. You bleeded a lie, not bleeded a lie. And that's what a goat do. Facts, let me show you. Happen to know dudes. Drafting, they don't do bad and they don't lose. Make you wanna bleed. It's the Go District, boys giving you the business and no gimmicks. The best ball drafts got me feeling like it's Christmas. Then it's Christmas all of a sudden, and these riches came from nothing. And I got this all from loving the district. See, I just drafted, forget it. I laugh at the critics, they mad at the digits. I clap back by listening. See, BALLiN ain't a problem if you kick it with them off. And I refresh the feed till autumn, then I bleed, go.